August 17, 1943, 25,000 feet above Stuttgart, Germany donned Luftwaffe pilot Oberleutnant Klaus Faber pushes his Messerschmitt Bf 109 into a diving attack on an American B-17 bomber formation. He's an experienced pilot, 23 confirmed kills. He knows the American bombers are heavily armed, but he's confident in his speed, his aircraft's superior maneuverability. He closes to 400 meters, standard attack range, then 300, and then the sky erupts. Not rifle-caliber machine guns, not the light defensive fire he'd encountered on British bombers. This is something entirely different. 12.7mm rounds, what the Americans call 50 caliber, traveling at 2,800 feet per second. Each round weighs nearly 2 ounces. Each bomber carries 13 machine guns. The formation of 18 bombers he's attacking? 234 50 caliber machine guns, all firing simultaneously. Faber would later describe it in his debriefing report, a report that would be discovered in captured Luftwaffe archives 70 years later. It was not like flying through flak. Flak, you can see, you can predict, you can evade. This was a wall of steel, continuous. The tracers were so dense they created a visible barrier. I watched my wingman's aircraft disintegrate. Not shot down, disintegrated. The wing simply separated from the fuselage. Faber survived that mission, barely. His aircraft took 17 hits. 4 rounds passed through his cockpit. 1 removed the top 6 inches of his canopy. He never flew another combat sortie. Not because he was injured, though he was, but because, as he admitted to his squadron commander, I cannot bring myself to approach those formations again. This is the story of the weapon that broke the Luftwaffe's fighting spirit over Germany. The weapon that German Panzer commanders called die amerikanische Sense. The American scythe. The T. Weapon that General der Fallschirmtruppe Alfred Schlemm, commander of German forces in the Netherlands, described as the single most effective small arm deployed by the Western Allies. Why Germans hated American M2. Why so much? This is the story of the Browning M2 50 caliber heavy machine gun, and why, to German soldiers across every theater of World War II, it represented something far more terrifying than just another weapon. It represented the entire industrial and tactical philosophy of the American war machine, a philosophy that prioritized overwhelming material superiority, sustained firepower, and logistical capacity over tactical sophistication. A philosophy the Germans, despite their tactical excellence, could not counter. By the end of the war, the United States had produced nearly 2 million 50 caliber machine guns. They appeared on virtually every American combat vehicle, aircraft and naval vessel, and German soldiers, from the steppes of Russia to the hedgerows of Normandy, from the skies over Berlin to the deserts of North Africa. They learned to fear the distinctive sound of the Ma-Deuce. To understand why the Germans feared the 50 caliber, we need to understand what made it different from every other weapon on the battlefield. And that story begins 2 decades before World War II, with one man, John Moses Browning. Browning was arguably the most prolific firearms designer in history. The M1911 pistol, the Browning automatic rifle, the Auto 5 shotgun. By 1918, his designs equipped the American military and civilian market alike. German aircraft were flying higher. Armor was getting thicker. The standard rifle caliber machine guns, 30 caliber, 7.92 millimeter, were becoming inadequate. The American military requested something more powerful, something that could penetrate aircraft armor at extreme range, something that could defeat light vehicle armor, something with enough kinetic energy to reach out past 1,000 meters and still deliver devastating effect. Browning's solution was elegant. Scale everything up. He designed a cartridge that was essentially a scaled-up version of the 30-06 rifle round, 12.7 millimeters in diameter, 99 millimeters long, capable of propelling a 42-gram projectile at 2,800 feet per second. The 50 caliber Browning machine gun cartridge, M50 BMG, to put that in perspective, a standard rifle bullet weighs about 10 grams. A 50 caliber bullet weighs 42 grams, more than 4 times heavier, and travels at comparable velocity. The kinetic energy delivered on target? Over 18,000 joules at the muzzle. At 500 meters, a 50 caliber round still carried enough energy to penetrate 34 millimeters of steel armor. But the cartridge was only half the solution. Browning needed a weapon system that could fire it reliably, repeatedly, for extended periods. In 1921, he completed the prototype that would become the M2. The design philosophy was revolutionary for its time. Absolute reliability through massive over-engineering. Where European machine guns used lightweight components and tight tolerances, Browning built his weapon heavy and robust. The M2 weighed 84 pounds, nearly 40 kilograms, unloaded. The barrel alone weighed 27 pounds. But that weight was strategic. The heavy barrel absorbed heat. The robust components tolerated dirt, sand, mud, and extreme temperature variations. The simple gas-operated short recoil mechanism had relatively few moving parts. The result? A weapon that could fire for extended periods without failure. Early military testing documented sustained fire rates of over 400 rounds per minute for 10 minutes, continuously without stoppage. With proper barrel changes, the weapon could maintain fire indefinitely. 1. Documented test at Aberdeen Proving Ground in 1933 ran for 3 million rounds without a critical parts failure. 3 million rounds, the U.S. military officially adopted the M2 in 1933. At the time, military planners couldn't have predicted its importance. They saw it as a specialized anti-aircraft weapon, a vehicle-mounted gun for limited applications. They didn't yet understand they had created the weapon that would define American military doctrine for the next 80 years. When war came in 1941, American industry scaled production dramatically. The simplicity of Browning's design meant it could be manufactured efficiently. No complex machining, no exotic materials, just robust American steel, mass-produced in quantities that would have seemed impossible to European manufacturers. By 1945, nearly 2,000 trousered M2. Browning machine guns produced 11 billion rounds of 50 BMG ammunition manufactured, installed on every category of American combat vehicle and aircraft. The BC-Han Bites M2 appeared everywhere. Heavy bombers, 10 to 13 guns per aircraft. Fighter aircraft, 6 to 8 guns. PT boats, up to 12 guns. Tanks and tank destroyers, 1 to 3 guns. Half-tracks and armored cars, 1 to 4 guns. Anti-aircraft positions, quad-mounted installations. Infantry support, tripod-mounted for sustained fire. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of American industrial capacity, the ability to produce a highly effective weapon system in quantities that overwhelmed any tactical advantages held by opponents, and German forces were about to discover what that industrial capacity meant on the battlefield. November 1943, the skies over Germany for Luftwaffe fighter pilots. The sight had become routine. American heavy bomber formations, flying in tight defensive boxes, 30 to 50 aircraft per group, approaching at 25,000 feet. What wasn't routine, what could never become routine, was attacking them. The American bombing doctrine relied on a simple principle: mutual defensive fire. Each B-17 Flying Fortress carried 13 50 caliber machine guns. Each B-24 Liberator carried 10, arranged in a combat box. Formation, an interlocking defensive formation where each bomber's guns covered the blind spots of adjacent aircraft. A typical 36-bomber group created a combined defensive armament of 468 machine guns, all 50 caliber, from any attack angle. A German fighter would face fire from at minimum 12 bombers, 150 guns, all within effective range simultaneously. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe fighter ace with 176 confirmed kills, described the tactical problem in his post-war memoir. Against the British night bombers, we had darkness as cover until the final approach. Against the American day formations, there was no cover. You had to fly directly into concentrated fire from hundreds of heavy machine guns. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Even with perfect gunnery, the bombers would score hits through sheer volume of fire, and their gunnery was far from poor. American aerial gunners received extensive training, over 300 hours before deployment. They trained on lead computing sites. They learned deflection shooting. Most importantly, they trained to work as coordinated teams within the formation. When a German fighter attacked, it didn't face individual bombers firing independently. It faced a coordinated response from the entire formation. Multiple gunners tracking the same target. Overlapping fire zones. Tracer rounds allowing gunners to walk fire onto targets through visual correction. The effectiveness was measurable. Average German fighter life expectancy attacking bomber formations, 7 to 10 missions. Luftwaffe fighter losses to bomber defensive fire in 1944 estimated 2,500-plus aircraft. Combat radius of 50 cal defensive fire, 1,800 meters maximum effective range. But the statistics don't capture the psychological reality. Major Heinz Knoke, Luftwaffe fighter pilot with 33 confirmed kills, documented his experiences attacking American formations in his combat diary, later published as I Flew for the Führer. Entry from July 29, 1943, attacked B-17 formation at 7,000 meters. My first pass, no hits observed on target. Pulled up and came around for second pass from 7 o'clock high. At 400 meters range, my canopy simply exploded. A 50 caliber round had passed through the armored glass without detonating, exited through the canopy frame. I was showered with plexiglass fragments, blood streaming down my face. I broke off immediately. Later inspection showed my aircraft had taken 11 hits in that single pass. 11. I fired for perhaps 3 seconds. They fired at me for perhaps 5 seconds. They landed 11 times more hits than I did. How are we supposed to sustain this? They couldn't. The Luftwaffe's attrition rate attacking American bomber formations became unsustainable by mid-1944. Not just from the fighters, P-47, Thunderbolts, and P-51 Mustangs escorting the formations, but from the bombers themselves. General Major Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, recognized the tactical impossibility in his strategic assessments to the high command. The American defensive armament creates a moving fortress that our fighters cannot effectively penetrate without prohibitive losses. Their 50 caliber machine guns have greater effective range than our 20mm cannon, superior sustained fire capability, and are present in such numbers that precision attack is impossible. We have achieved tactical excellence in our pilots and our aircraft design, but we cannot counter their material advantage through skill alone. The Americans understood this perfectly. Their doctrine didn't rely on superior aircraft performance or pilot skill, though they had both. It relied on overwhelming firepower sustained through industrial capacity. Each bomber carried between 4,000 and 6,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. Typical missions expended 30% of loaded ammunition, roughly 1,500 rounds per aircraft. A single 36 bomber group mission could expend 54,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition in defensive fire alone, and the American logistics system could sustain that. Expenditure rate indefinitely. German pilots recognized they weren't just fighting bombers. They were fighting American factory capacity. Every fighter lost to defensive fire was irreplaceable. Pilot training took months. Aircraft production was constrained by resources and factory capacity. Every bomber gunner, every bullet, every aircraft destroyed could be replaced within weeks. The mathematics of attrition warfare. German fighter production, 1944, 40,000 aircraft. German fighter pilot training capacity, just 6,000 pilots per year. Luftwaffe fighter losses, 1944, 32 to 32,000 aircraft. American heavy bomber production, 1944, and 16,000 aircraft. American aerial gunner training capacity, 60,000 per year. 50 BMG ammunition production, 1944. 4.2 billion rounds. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe had effectively conceded daytime air superiority over Germany. Not because they lacked aircraft or pilots, though both were increasingly scarce, but because the tactical cost of attacking American bomber formations exceeded any strategic benefit. The 50 caliber machine gun, through sheer volume and reliability, had achieved what strategic bombing theorists had predicted: air supremacy through defensive firepower. And once that air supremacy was achieved, the bombers completed their mission uncontested. The wall of steel had held. July 1944. Normandy, France. For German forces defending the hedgerow country, the Allied invasion had settled into a grinding war of attrition. The bocage terrain, ancient farming land divided by high earthen banks topped with dense hedges, created a defender's paradise. Every field was a potential killing ground. Every hedgerow concealed defensive positions. German forces, including veteran Panzer and Panzer Grenadier units, had prepared positions that maximized the terrain's advantages. But they were about to encounter a weapon that fundamentally changed the tactical calculus of hedgerow warfare. The 50 caliber machine gun, mounted on virtually every American armored vehicle. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein commanded Panzer Lehr Division, considered one of the Wehrmacht's elite formations. In the weeks following D-Day, his division encountered American armored forces employing tactics that German doctrine had no effective counter. For Bayerlein documented the experience in operational reports later captured by Allied intelligence. The Americans employ their heavy machine guns in a manner we had not anticipated. Before approaching any hedgerow or tree line, they saturate the area with 50 caliber fire. Not targeted fire, suppressive fire. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of rounds into areas where our troops might be positioned. This reconnaissance by fire gives them tactical intelligence without exposing infantry. If our forces return fire, they reveal positions. If they do not return fire, the Americans advance with confidence the area is clear. Either way, we lose the initiative. The tactic Bayerlein described, reconnaissance by fire, became standard American doctrine in the bocage. It leveraged the fundamental American advantages: abundant ammunition, reliable weapons, and an industrial base that could sustain expenditure rates German forces couldn't match. Typical American armored unit ammunition loadout per vehicle: M4 Sherman tank, 600 rounds of 50 BMG. M3 half-track, 750 rounds of 50 BMG. M8 armored car, 800 rounds of 50 BMGN. American Armored Cavalry Reconnaissance Troop, 17 vehicles, carried approximately 12,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition in one engagement, and they used it. Oberst Hans von Luck, commander of the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, described the psychological impact on his troops. "My men were experienced veterans. They had fought in Russia, in North Africa. They understood combat. But the American .50 caliber machine gun created a psychological effect unlike anything they had experienced. The sound alone, that deep, hammering sound, caused instinctive ducking even among veterans. The tracers at night created the impression of overwhelming force, and the destructive effect on field fortifications was severe. The .50 caliber rounds' capabilities against field fortifications: sandbags, complete penetration up to 4 sandbag layers; wood logs, 20 cm diameter, penetration with fragmentation; brick walls, penetration with spalling effect; concrete, non-reinforced; femkitsistus, penetration at close range; light vehicle armor, penetration up to 15 mm at 500 meters. German defensive positions, typically constructed for protection against rifle caliber fire and shrapnel, offered minimal protection against sustained .50 caliber fire. Von Luck continued in his memoir. We constructed positions that had stopped British and Canadian attacks, positions with overhead cover, reinforced walls, concealed firing positions. The Americans would simply saturate the position with .50 caliber fire until the position was untenable, not destroyed, but so thoroughly suppressed that occupying it became suicidal. The tactical doctrine supported this approach. American armor commanders didn't need to identify specific threats. They could afford to expend ammunition preemptively. Every hedgerow? Fire into it. Every building? Fire into it. Every tree line? Fire into it. In urban combat, the .50 caliber became even more devastating. Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, demonstrated this perfectly. American armored columns advancing through French towns employed a simple tactic. The lead vehicle would fire its .50 caliber into every building at street level and second story before the column passed. Not aimed fire, not precision engagement, just sustained suppressive fire that made occupation of those buildings impossible during the column's passage. German after-action reports documented the effect. Urban defensive positions, carefully prepared with firing positions and reinforced walls, became death traps. The .50 caliber rounds penetrated brick and wood with ease. Ricochets made interior spaces lethal. Our troops learned to evacuate defensive positions when American armor approached, rather than attempt to hold them. At night, the psychological effect intensified. Every fifth round in American .50 caliber ammunition belts was a tracer, a round with a pyrotechnic charge that illuminated its trajectory. This allowed gunners to adjust fire visually, but it had an unintended psychological effect on German forces. If every fifth round was visible, that meant 4 rounds were invisible for every tracer you could see. The visual effect created the impression of even greater volume of fire than actually existed. Unteroffizier Heinrich Severloh, who defended Omaha Beach on D-Day before being captured later in the campaign, recalled, "At night, watching American positions, you could see streams of tracers, continuous fire. It seemed impossible they could sustain that rate of fire. But they did, hour after hour. We learned they had virtually unlimited ammunition. That was the fundamental difference between us. We counted our rounds. They counted their targets. The American logistics system made this possible. The Red Ball Express, the massive truck convoy system supporting forces after the breakout from Normandy, transported thousands of tons of ammunition daily. Daily American ammunition expenditure in Normandy campaign: small arms, 15 million rounds per day; peak, 50 BMG, 3 million rounds per day; peak. Artillery shells, 200,000 plus rounds per day. The .50 caliber also proved devastatingly effective against German vehicles. Not tanks. The M2 couldn't penetrate tank armor frontally. But everything else was vulnerable. Half-tracks, engine and crew compartment penetration, trucks, complete destruction, light reconnaissance vehicles, total vulnerability. Motorcycles, catastrophic. Effect artillery towed by vehicles. Crew and tow vehicle destruction, American fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts, and P-51 Mustangs carried 6 to 8 50 caliber machine guns. Their primary ground attack armament wasn't bombs or rockets. It was the 50 caliber. A P-47 Thunderbolt carried 8 50 caliber machine guns synchronized to fire through the propeller arc. Combined rate of fire, over 4,000 rounds per minute. During Operation Cobra, Allied fighter bombers conducted nearly continuous ground attack missions. German vehicle columns attempting to move during daylight faced devastating attacks. General Major Rudolf Freiherr von Gersdorf, Chief of Staff. For German 7th Army, reported daylight movement became impossible after mid-July. American fighter bombers, armed primarily with 50 caliber machine guns, destroyed any column that moved during daylight hours. Not just tanks, our supply trucks, ambulances, communications vehicles. Everything. The 50 caliber round proved sufficient to disable or destroy virtually all our non-armored vehicles, and they had an inexhaustible supply of both aircraft and ammunition. The Falaise Pocket, the attempted German withdrawal from Normandy in August 1944, became the ultimate demonstration of American air-ground firepower integration. German forces, attempting to escape through the narrow gap, faced continuous artillery fire, Allied armor blocking positions, and, most devastatingly, Allied fighter bombers conducting round-the-clock strafing runs. Post-battle reconnaissance documented the results. 500 tanks and assault guns destroyed or abandoned, 1,000 to 2,000 pounds other vehicles destroyed, sent 5,000, horses killed. German logistics still relied heavily on horse-drawn transport. The majority of vehicle kills were attributed to 50 caliber fire from aircraft. German survivors of the Falaise Pocket described an experience unlike any previous combat. We were not defeated tactically. We were overwhelmed materially. The Americans had more of everything. More tanks, more trucks, more ammunition, more aircraft. But most importantly, they had the 50 caliber machine gun on everything. Every vehicle, every aircraft, every position. You could not hide from it. You could not counter it. You could only try to survive it. As American forces pursued across France, the 50 caliber remained the constant, the weapon that appeared on every vehicle, the weapon that fired first in every engagement, the weapon that German forces learned to fear above almost all others, not because it was sophisticated, but because it was everywhere. It never stopped working, and the Americans never ran out of ammunition for it. If the single M2 Browning was devastating, the Quad 50, 4 M2 machine guns mounted on a single rotating platform, was apocalyptic. The M45 quad mount, typically installed on the M16 multiple-gun motor carriage half-track, represented American military philosophy in its purest form. If one gun is good, 4 guns is better. Combined rate of fire, 2,300 rounds per minute. For German aircraft, the Quad 50 created an engagement problem with no solution. Hauptmann Johannes Naumann, Luftwaffe ground attack pilot flying the Focke-Wulf FW-190, documented his first encounter with American anti-aircraft defenses in Italy, 1944. We were conducting low-level attacks against American supply columns. Standard tactical approach, high-speed pass, deliver ordnance, egress at low altitude using terrain masking. I began my attack run at 50 meters altitude. The convoy opened fire. I had encountered anti-aircraft fire before. This was different. Not heavy flak, but continuous streams of tracers. Multiple streams, converging. I aborted the attack immediately. My wingman continued, I watched his aircraft hit the ground 3 seconds later. No explosion. No dramatic crash. The aircraft simply disintegrated. Wing sections separated. The fuselage broke apart. Later I learned they recovered over 250 caliber impacts on the wreckage. I never attempted another attack on an American convoy. The Quad 50 wasn't designed for precision. It was designed for saturation. American anti-aircraft doctrine employed the weapon in a specific tactical role. Primary targets: low-flying aircraft below 1,500 meters. Engagement method: barrage fire into predicted flight path. Ammunition expenditure: maximum rate, continuous fire during engagement window, crews trained to fire in sustained bursts of 3 to 5 seconds, creating a cone of fire that aircraft would fly through rather than attempting to track individual targets precisely. The mathematics were brutal. Quad 50 effective range: 1,600 meters against aircraft rate of fire. 2,300 rounds per minute. All 4 guns. Tracer ratio: 1.4. Visible indication of bullet stream. Typical engagement time: 5 to 8 seconds rounds expended. Per engagement: 200-300 rounds at that rate of fire. The Quad 50 placed approximately 40 bullets into every cubic meter of airspace within its effective cone of fire during a typical engagement. An aircraft flying at 300 kilometers per hour, standard attack speed for German ground attack aircraft, would transit the engagement zone in approximately 5 seconds. During those 5 seconds, the Quad 50 could place 200 rounds into the aircraft's flight path. Even if 99% of rounds missed, which was typical for anti-aircraft fire, 2 rounds would hit the aircraft. 250 caliber rounds were sufficient to destroy hydraulic systems, sever control cables, penetrate engine blocks, kill, or wound the pilot rupture fuel tanks, disable weapons systems. Luftwaffe loss reports from the Western Front documented the effect. 44 German aircraft losses to ground fire. Western Front. Total losses to anti-aircraft fire: 16,800 aircraft estimated. Losses to 50 caliber weapons at 3,400 aircraft, 50%. Average altitude of losses: below 1,000 meters, the Quad 50 appeared in American force structure in density that German forces hadn't anticipated. Standard American Armored Division, 1944. 36 Quad 50 mounts in Anti-Aircraft Battalion Additional Single. 50 Cal mounts, Predators 700 plus across all vehicles. An American armored column on the march presented a moving anti-aircraft defense network with overlapping engagement zones. Any aircraft attempting low-level attack would face fire from multiple Quad 50 positions simultaneously, plus additional fire from single-mounted M2s on tanks, half-tracks, trucks, and support vehicles. Major Karl-Heinz Becker, Luftwaffe staff officer responsible for ground attack tactics, issued guidance to units in late 1944. Attacks against American armored or motorized columns are to be conducted only under following conditions: altitude, above 2,000 meters, weather conditions preventing accurate anti-aircraft fire, or when absolutely essential for operational success. The risk-to-effect ratio of low-level attacks against American forces equipped with the Quad 50 caliber mount has become unacceptable. Pilot losses exceed tactical gains. In other words, don't attack them. While the 50 caliber dominated European battlefields, it was in the Pacific theater that the weapon demonstrated its most versatile applications. Against an enemy fighting with fundamentally different tactics. The Japanese military doctrine emphasized close combat, night infiltration, and mass infantry assaults, the infamous Banzai charges that sought to overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers and willingness to accept catastrophic casualties. For United States Marine Corps units fighting across the Pacific Islands, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the M2 Browning became the primary defensive weapon against these mass assault tactics. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, Medal of Honor recipient, commanded machine gun sections at Guadalcanal in October 1942. His after-action report documented the weapon's effectiveness. The Japanese attacked in waves throughout the night. Hundreds of soldiers, maybe 1,000. They came in mass formations, expecting to overrun our positions through numbers. We had 2 M2 Brownings covering the approach. I personally manned 1 gun for most of the engagement. The .50 caliber stopped them cold. Not slowed them, stopped them. Bodies piled up 50 meters from our position. They couldn't advance through the fire. We fired approximately 26,000 rounds that night between both guns. Both weapons functioned without failure throughout the entire engagement. 26,000 rounds in one night, without mechanical failure. This reliability under extreme conditions, the humid, corrosive environment of tropical islands, sand contamination, sustained rapid fire, demonstrated why the American over-engineering philosophy worked. German machine guns like the MG-42 had higher rates of fire. Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns were lighter and more mobile, but neither could sustain the firing rates the M2 achieved under combat conditions without failure. During amphibious assaults, defeating the RT, signature American operation in the Pacific, the .50 caliber provided critical fire support from multiple platforms simultaneously. Landing. Vehicle tracked, LVT, Amtracs. 1 to 2 50 cal mounts per vehicle, landing craft infantry, LCI. 4 to 8 50 cal mounts landing ship medium, LSM. 8 to 12.50 cal mounts at Iwo Jima, February 1945. The initial assault wave included over 400 landing craft. Conservative estimates put the combined .50 caliber armament at over 1,500 machine guns approaching the beach simultaneously. Japanese defenders, deeply entrenched in reinforced concrete bunkers and cave systems, faced a volume of suppressive fire unlike anything encountered in previous Pacific battles. Lieutenant Colonel Justice M. Chambers, commanding 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, reported the .50 caliber fire from offshore craft and Amtracs provided continuous suppression of visible defensive positions during the landing phase. While it couldn't penetrate the heaviest fortifications, it forced Japanese defenders to remain under cover, significantly reducing their effective fire during our most vulnerable phase, the beach crossing. At sea, the .50 caliber transformed small boat operations, PT boats, patrol torpedo boats. The fast attack craft used extensively in the Pacific carried formidable armament for their size. Standard PT boat armament, late war configuration, 4 .50 caliber M2 Brownings, twin mounts, port and starboard. Some variants carried 8 or more .50 cal guns. Combined firepower, over 2,000 rounds per minute. Lieutenant Commander John D. Bulkley, commander of PT boat squadrons in Philippines, described night engagements with Japanese barges and small craft. The .50 caliber gave us decisive advantage in surface engagements against Japanese supply barges. Their vessels were lightly constructed, wood or thin steel. Our .50s would literally saw them in half. In night engagements, we'd illuminate targets with searchlights and open fire with all .50s simultaneously. Typical engagement lasted 30 to 45 seconds. By the end, the target vessel was sinking or burning. We rarely expended torpedoes on small craft. The .50s were sufficient. PT boat combat effectiveness in Pacific theater. Japanese vessels destroyed by PT boats, 332. Confirmed percentage, destroyed by .50 cal fire alone. 65%. Torpedoes expended. Less than 200 total average engagement range. 200-500 meters against Japanese aircraft. The .50 caliber proved equally devastating. The Japanese Air Forces, both Navy and Army aviation, operated aircraft that were generally lighter and less armored than German counterparts. Japanese doctrine prioritized maneuverability and range over pilot protection and structural durability. Mitsubishi A6M-0. Fighter specifications. Armor protection. Minimal, early models had none, self-sealing fuel tanks. Not installed until late war variants. Structural design. Lightweight aluminum. Minimal redundancy. This made them exceptionally vulnerable to .50 caliber fire. Marine and Navy fighter pilots reported that Japanese aircraft often disintegrated or caught fire after only a few hits from .50 caliber weapons. The F-4U Corsair, primary marine fighter in the Pacific, carried 6 .50 caliber M2 Brownings with 2,400 total rounds. Combat reports consistently documented that engagements with Japanese aircraft averaged less than 3 seconds of sustained fire to achieve kill. F-4U. Corsair combat record, Pacific Theater. Kill-to-loss ratio, 11.1 average ammunition expenditure per kill, 300-400 rounds. Primary cause of Japanese aircraft losses, 15.50 caliber fire during the Battle of Okinawa, the final major. Pacific Campaign, the .50 caliber faced its most desperate challenge, defending against kamikaze attacks. Japanese. Suicide aircraft tactics required defensive fire to completely destroy approaching aircraft before impact. A damaged aircraft could still complete its mission if the pilot remained alive long enough to reach the target. American naval vessels responded by installing unprecedented numbers of anti-aircraft weapons. Dart USS Lafay, DD-724, a destroyer that survived intense kamikaze attacks in April 1945, carried 6 quad 40mm mounts, 12 20mm cannon, multiple .50 caliber mounts. Exact number varied. During an 80-minute period on April 16, 1945, Lafay engaged 22 separate kamikaze attacks. The ship survived hits from 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. But defensive fire, primarily from .50 caliber and 40mm weapons, destroyed or drove off 16 attacking aircraft before they could. Impact crew accounts describe the .50 caliber mounts as critical weapons for engaging aircraft that penetrated the outer defensive fire zones. Post-battle analysis of destroyed kamikaze aircraft showed that many had sustained 50 to 100 hits before crashing. The .50 caliber, while not the most powerful anti-aircraft weapon available, was the most available anti-aircraft weapon installed in sufficient numbers that overlapping fire zones made successful attack runs nearly impossible. As American forces advanced across the Pacific, from the Solomons through the Marianas to the Philippines and finally Okinawa, the .50 caliber remained constant. Every Marine rifle company had M2 Brownings. Every landing craft mounted them. Every fighter aircraft carried them. Every PT boat bristled with them. Every support vehicle had them. In post-war interrogations, Japanese officers consistently identified American material superiority, particularly in automatic weapons and ammunition supply, as the decisive factor in Pacific Island battles. General Tadamichi Kurebayashi, commander of Japanese forces at Iwo Jima, wrote in his final dispatch before the island fell, "The enemy's superiority in firepower is absolute. Their machine guns fire continuously without apparent ammunition constraint. Our forces cannot maneuver under such fire. We can only remain in defensive positions until they are destroyed by overwhelming bombardment." The .50 caliber hadn't just contributed to victory in the Pacific. It had made the island-hopping campaign tactically feasible by providing the sustained firepower necessary to suppress fanatical defensive tactics and defeat mass infantry assaults. By 1945, the war in Europe had moved into Germany itself. and the 50 caliber was about to prove its effectiveness in the most challenging environment. Urban warfare. Cities like Aachen, Cologne, and Berlin became battlefields where combat occurred room by room, building by building, street by street. German defenders, often Waffen-SS or Wehrmacht veterans with years of combat experience, employed sophisticated urban defense tactics. They used rubble for cover, created interlocking fields of fire, fortified buildings into strong points, and conducted counterattacks through underground passages. Standard German urban defense doctrine. Strong points. Reinforced buildings with multiple firing positions. Kill zones. Streets and squares covered by overlapping machine gun fire. Counterattack routes. Cellars and underground passages. Obstacles. Rubble barricades. Mines. Demolitions. The Battle of Aachen, October 1944, demonstrated how American forces adapted the 50 caliber to urban combat. Sergeant Jake McNeice, 101st Airborne Division, later transferred to infantry for Aachen, described urban tactics. The 50 cal became our primary building assault weapon. We'd set up the gun with a clear field of fire down a street or facing a target building. When we assaulted, the 50 would fire continuously into the target structure. Walls, windows, doors. Not aimed shots, just continuous suppressive fire. The 50 caliber rounds went through brick walls like they weren't there. Germans inside the building couldn't return fire effectively. By the time our assault team reached the building, defenders were either dead, wounded, or so suppressed they couldn't fight effectively. The tactic, known as reconnaissance, by fire in open terrain, became suppression, by fire in urban combat, American. Infantry units would advance behind a moving wall of 50 caliber fire. Buildings along the route of advance were systematically engaged before troops approached. The destructive effect on building interiors was catastrophic. 50 caliber rounds penetrating. Exterior walls maintained sufficient energy to cause severe spalling, fragmentation of the interior wall. Surface, creating a secondary shrapnel effect that made interior spaces lethal. Penetration. Test results. 1945 U.S. Army Ordnance. Standard brick wall, 30 cm. Complete penetration with fragmentation. Reinforced concrete, 20 cm. Penetration at ranges under 100 meters. Wooden structures. Complete penetration through multiple walls. Sandbag fortifications. Penetration through 6+ bag staff. Sergeant Paul Jake Jackson, 3rd Armored Division, described tank operations in Cologne. Our Shermans each had a 50 cal on the turret. In city fighting, the 50 was more useful than the main gun for most targets. The main gun was for fortified positions or when we encountered German armor. But for routine building clearing, the 50, we'd pull up to an intersection. The tank commander would traverse the 50 and fire into every window, every door, every opening on buildings we could see. A few hundred rounds per building. Then infantry would move up. Germans learned quickly that defending a building targeted by a Sherman's 50 was suicide. The rounds came through walls. Ricochets made entire floors dangerous. We'd find defensive positions abandoned after only 30 seconds of 50 cal fire. Urban combat ammunition consumption rates. Germany, 1945. Average 50 Pton BMG expenditure per infantry battalion per day. $15,000, 25,000 rounds. Armored battalion daily expenditure. 40,000, 60,000 rounds ratio compared to rifle ammunition. 1.8. By weight, vastly more rifle ammo, but significant. 50 cal expenditure. The American logistics system sustained these expenditure rates throughout the campaign into Germany. German defenders faced not just superior numbers and armor, but an enemy willing and able to expend ammunition at rates that seemed incomprehensible. General Major Rudolf Sickenius, commander of the 189th Infantry Division, captured during the Rhine crossings, described the experience in post-war interrogation. American tactical doctrine in urban combat was simple: apply overwhelming firepower to every potential defensive position before committing infantry. Their 50 caliber machine guns were central to this approach. Our troops would prepare defensive positions that had stopped Russian attacks, fortifications that would require direct artillery hits to neutralize. The Americans would simply fire thousands of 50 caliber rounds into the building until it was untenable. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't sophisticated, but it was effective, and they never ran out of ammunition. The Pacific Theater saw similar urban warfare during the Battle of Manila. February-March 1945, Japanese naval infantry, defending the Philippine capital, fought with the same fanatical determination they'd shown on Pacific Islands. But in an urban environment, without prepared cave systems and reinforced bunkers, they were even more vulnerable to concentrated 50 caliber fire. American and Filipino forces employed the same tactics used in Germany: systematic suppression of defensive positions with concentrated 50 caliber fire before infantry assault. The Battle of Manila became one of the war's most destructive urban battles, with over 100,000 civilian casualties and massive urban destruction. But American military casualties were significantly lower than projected, primarily because the 50 caliber allowed suppression of defensive positions without requiring close assault under fire. Estimated American casualties avoided through suppressive fire doctrine: 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, American forces had perfected urban warfare tactics built around the M2 Browning's capabilities. The weapon had proven adaptable to every combat environment: aerial combat, bomber and fighter defensive and offensive armament, ground combat, infantry support, and armored vehicle armament, anti-aircraft, quad mounts creating impenetrable defensive zones, naval, warfare, PT boat and vessel defense armament, urban combat, building suppression and street fighting, one weapon, dozens of applications, millions produced, billions of rounds fired, and German soldiers, from the first encounters in North Africa to the final battles in Berlin, had learned that the distinctive sound of the Ma Deuce meant one thing: overwhelming. American material superiority was about to be applied to their position. 80 years after its adoption in 1933, the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun remains in frontline service with the United States military and over 100 nations worldwide. No other weapon system designed before World War II remains in widespread military use. Not the Lee Enfield rifle, not the Kar 98K, not the MG-42, not the PPSH-41, only the Ma Deuce. It has served in every American conflict: World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Ongoing operations. Worldwide ammunition production has never ceased. The 50 BMG cartridge, designed in 1921, remains in production at volumes exceeding 500 million rounds annually worldwide. The weapon has been mounted on over 100 different military vehicles, dozens of aircraft types, naval vessels from patrol boats to aircraft carriers, static defensive positions, improvised technical vehicles, and remarkably, a modern M2 Browning is mechanically nearly identical to John Moses Browning's 1921 prototype. Minor improvements: chrome-plated barrels, 1950s, improved corrosion resistance, quick change barrel system, 1950s, easier barrel replacement, improved ammunition feed systems, reduced jamming, but the core weapon? Unchanged. The same recoil-operated mechanism, the same firing rate, the same caliber, the same fundamental design. The 50 BMG cartridge spawned an entirely new category of weapons: anti-materiel sniper rifles, rifles like the Barrett M82, Macmillan TC-50, and Accuracy International AS-50 fire, the same ammunition designed for the M2 Browning, now adapted for precision long-range engagement. Current record for longest confirmed sniper kill, 3,540 meters. Canadian Forces 2017. Weapon, Macmillan TAC-50. Cartridge, 50 BMG, but the M2's real legacy isn't longevity. It's what the weapon represented in World War II. The 50 caliber machine gun was the purest expression of American military philosophy. Victory through industrial capacity. United States, 1941-1945. M2 Browning production, 2,000 units, 50 BMG ammunition, 11,000 rounds, military vehicles produced, 12,600 combat aircraft produced, 300,000 German Reich, 1939-1945. MG 3442 production, 1,000 units, 7. 92mm ammunition, 10,000 rounds military vehicles produced, 670,000 combat aircraft produced, 120,000 Germany had tactical excellence. Germany had superior tank designs, late war. Germany had jet aircraft first. Germany had innovative weapons systems, but Germany couldn't produce them in sufficient quantities to matter. The best tank in the world is useless without fuel. The most skilled pilot can't fly without aircraft. The most accurate machine gun is ineffective without ammunition. America didn't try to build the best weapons. America built good enough weapons, in quantities that made tactical superiority irrelevant. The M2 Browning was reliable, not revolutionary. It was effective, not exotic. It was simple, not sophisticated, and it was everywhere. For German soldiers, whether Luftwaffe pilots over Stuttgart, Panzer commanders in Normandy, or infantry defending Berlin, the 50 caliber represented a fundamental truth. They were fighting an enemy whose factories outproduced their factories 10-1, whose supply lines delivered ammunition faster than they could expend it, whose military doctrine accepted that overwhelming material advantage was a valid substitute for tactical sophistication. German generals understood this. Rommel, after encountering American forces in North Africa, wrote, "The Americans supply their front-line soldiers with a luxury of equipment and material that we cannot match. Every soldier seems to have unlimited ammunition. Every vehicle mounts heavy weapons. Their logistics are impeccable." The war wasn't won by superior tactics. It wasn't won by brilliant generalship. It wasn't won by better-trained soldiers. It was won by factories, by workers in Detroit building tanks, by women in munitions plants loading ammunition, by shipyards launching vessels, by aircraft factories assembling bombers, and by John Moses Browning, who in 1921 designed a weapon so reliable, so effective, and so simple to manufacture that it would still be killing America's enemies a century later. The Germans didn't fear the 50 caliber because it was technologically advanced. They feared it because there were 2 million of them, because behind every gun were factories that could build more, because behind every bullet fired were factories producing billions more, because defeating one American position armed with 50 caliber machine guns just meant advancing into fire from the next position. And the next. And the next. The price was paid by brave soldiers on both sides. American troops who advanced under fire. German troops who fought with courage despite impossible odds. But the outcome was never in doubt. Not after American industry mobilized. Not after factories began producing weapons and ammunition at rates that seemed impossible. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun didn't win World War II alone, but it represented the philosophy that did: overwhelming force, sustained logistics, and industrial capacity that no enemy could match. The Ma Deuce. Still in service. Still feared. Still effective. 1933